So today is Friday, 28 October. Um, correct me if I'm wrong, we did or did not mention that there would be some new activities, some new assignments and solutions where we start working with digital components, and that the tasks you completed for assignment 1.2 to optimize your personal technology, that we would repeat that activity. If this was performed at the beginning of the semester, there's a lot that's happened since the start of the semester and where we are right now. Does anyone recall mention of this Wednesday or Monday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I did want to talk about something in particular, and it's mentioned in the YouTube video. And I want to step through this intentionally on screen, because if you're reading the references and you're watching the video and doing any kind of multitasking, it's easy to miss. But essentially, yeah, when I repeat this assignment, I'm going to update this so it shows Ventura instead of Monterey. So there is an entirely new version of the Mac OS, and there's an entirely new version of VirtualBox that accommodates the new CPU that's in the latest Macs, MacBooks, Mac Minis, iMacs, and Mac Pros. Essentially, the M1 ARM processor. It is a CPU on steroids. It is incredibly powerful, but that's due in part to the fact that it uses reduced instruction sets. That's a trend in industry that we're going to become intimately familiar with in the next module. One of the things that has to happen is that when you're optimizing your personal technology, after you run updates, so the first thing that has to happen is that everybody runs updates. And essentially, if you watch this video, what they recommend is that you complete your system updates. And that means you have to be on this version of Windows 10. Or as soon as on Windows 11, this same version is released, you need to migrate that as soon as possible. So it's 22H2, and the build number is 19045. And then on top of that, there are cumulative updates to that new release. So this is significant and incredibly important to work promptly, because it's a whole new release of the operating system. The kernel of the operating system has been forklifted out, and there's a whole new kernel of the operating system installed. And what we found is that when you work VirtualBox, what will happen is that if you don't have the latest versions of this, the 7.0.2 implementation of VirtualBox won't work properly. Now, to this point, we have not installed VirtualBox. Is that a correct statement?
No, not, I mean, yeah, we
Yes.
haven't installed it in this class.
In this class, we haven't installed VirtualBox for this class, right? We've installed the HDL simulator, right? The HDL simulation environment, where we're building digital components. But we haven't installed a virtual machine application in order to build a virtual machine. And in most cases, your technology is very much up to the task, so long as you have 2 or more cores and you have 8 gigs of RAM, and you could actually push it and get away with 4 gigs of RAM if you were optimized. But the first trick is to make sure that you're on the latest version. So whether you're Windows 10 or you're Windows 11, you want to make sure that you've updated Windows. Then you also want to go down the list of applications in your programs and features. And you're going to want to make sure that the most commonly used applications are up to date, like your browser and the Office suite. And if you have a PDF reader, that kind of stuff, you want to make sure that you check for updates to make sure that everything is updated. Any questions so far? So when you watch this YouTube video, some of this is going to be repetitive, but again, I want to walk through it. Once all of that is done, the next trick, and it is a trick, is to halt and close out all your applications. So what we're finding is that students are creatures of habit. So you have a lot going on. You have more than one class. You have lots of things running on your taskbar. And basically, if you just watch this video and walk through it in plain terms, step by step, without stopping before the disk cleanup, this last step here, right? Disk cleanup and defragment, then the time you spend doing the rest of this is wasted. Let me repeat that. You can go through all this other trouble, but then when you get to the part where you turn the performance of your laptop sideways, if you're wondering like, oh yeah, things seem faster for a while, but really not that much. When I did this back in August, well, there were some improvements, but it wasn't like twice as fast, right? If that's the experience that you had early this semester, it could be that when you pushed ahead to finish the assigned tasks, if you had a bunch of things loaded in the task tray, if you had a single browser loaded with 27 tabs open, that's like the equivalent of 27 separate browser windows open. Okay? You can't have that. You got to close all the tabs. And then you got to close out all the applications. And then after you restart your system, it's best to restart your system. You've updated everything. That's when you reboot your system. Make sure you're doing nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. You're not connected to the internet. You know, you're not streaming something over here. You don't have a please, you do not have a BitTorrent client in the system tray running. If you're using MicroTorrent or something, quit that application and make sure it doesn't auto start when you come up. If any of that stuff is running in the mix while you're trying to do the disk cleanup and defragment, it's not going to be effective. And that takes a little more focus and a few more minutes of time, but it's well worth it. Now, when you run your disk cleanup, the best way to get to that is, if you don't have it on your start menu already, I would recommend that you add it to your start menu in Windows. And you can get to it by going to the control panel. If you don't have control panel on your start menu, all you have to do is start typing. Right? We're going to be in and out of here a lot, so it would be good for you to have that handy. All you have to do is right click and then pin it to the start if it isn't already pinned to begin with. When you go into the control panel, the administrative tools, here's where you have the disk cleanup and the defrag. You should right click those and also pin those to the start menu. Now, don't pin them to the taskbar, pin them to the start menu. When you run them from the start menu, you're going to want to right click them and run them as administrator. Now, we've been through this some before, yeah? The things perform differently when you run them as administrator. Installations work better when you run them as administrator. Have we shared that previously?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad some things are sticking. All right, and what you want to do is check every box except for the delivery optimization file. If you don't see a more options tab, there will be an extra feature down here that you click, and then it'll it'll scroll through status bar again, and then the more options tab will appear. But you run through this, and I've already done it already, but after the latest update, I had like 6 gigs of drive space I could reclaim. Some laptops are limited with their drive space, so every gig counts. When I get to this point where everything except delivery optimization files is selected, I'm going to go to more options and click cleanup and then delete. And this is with nothing running, no active system tray blinkies for dark web crazy BitTorrent streams, right? None of that, please. Because I've been sharing screens with a lot of students in recent days, and I ask them, did you do the optimization thing earlier this year? And they're like, yeah, we're just wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. It's like, yeah, something ain't right. So you're going to delete. And as long as you're doing this with nothing running after a cold reboot, you hit clean up again just to make sure and tell it, yeah, I do want to delete. Do it twice, then come back here, make sure, double check, because sometimes it's kind of goofy. But when you go through this tab and then come back, for some reason, sometimes these are unchecked again. I'm not sure why. Could be demon possessed, something like that. Yeah. You click OK, and then it does its magic. Now, in the interest of time, I performed this after the operating system feature update. So I replaced the kernel of my operating system, and I'm now running with the latest version. I just showed it to you. And again, there were gigs of stuff. It would have taken a lot longer if I had done that the first time and demonstrated it. But then we're also going to go through with nothing else running. After we do that, we are going to run our defrag, right? And I just did that incorrectly. Can anybody tell me what I just did incorrectly to bring that screen up?
You didn't run as administrator?
Thank you. Good catch. Awesome. You want to run it as, you want to right click it. Whenever you have serious maintenance to do, always right click and run as administrator. It's going to make a difference. Now, have I defragged this recently? Recently? No, I haven't. Yeah, 24 days ago is not recent.
How long? What would you say is recent?
I would say if you're in the habit of doing it like every other week at least, you know, twice a month. After you do cumulative, especially after you do cumulative updates, right? So cumulative updates can be very chunky. It's not a whole kernel replacement. It's not a forklift replacement of the entire operating system, but a cumulative update can be a lot of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and click optimize. And it doesn't take long with a solid state hard drive, right? You saw that. Blink, it's done. Yeah. Was there a question? I'm hearing some audio. Was there a question? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. In that other link, we talk about modifying your swap file or page file memory. Does anyone recall noodling with the swap file or page file memory early this semester? Anyone?
Wait, say that again?
The last step that I'm going to demonstrate involves a change that's kind of like an industry trade secret. A lot of people don't know to do this, but if you become a system administrator with servers, you do this all the time, and it can dramatically improve the performance of your server.
Was it like,
Yeah.
I remember one time you were talking about don't make 2 separate like accounts.
Okay, that would be eliminating the first account exposure. Yeah, that has to do with stability when you're connected online. This would be something a little different.
Is it
Making your performance, regular performance.
Yes, you get into the performance tab, and what I want to do is spend a little more time with you this morning about why this is important, okay? So what we're going to do with our computer architecture class is set the stage for you to investigate the nature of digital components in terms of the hardware and how that presents in the operating system. And that's part of module 4 now. So this is module 4 stuff. And I'm going to post a module 4 addendum over the weekend. So this content is going to be a part of that. We're also going to set the stage for you to install this virtual box. And if you're not in any of my other courses and haven't done this already, a few little tips and tricks that are missed could make all the difference in terms of your experience. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to open up our file explorer, and we're going to right click this My Computer or this computer, or if you've named your computer something, I'm going to select it and then I'm going to right click it and go to properties. Now you can also get into this through the systems option within settings. So you can go this way and get into settings if you want. I like this approach because it kind of takes us right here, and then I can go to advanced system settings. Now, my laptop has 12 gigs of RAM. So when I go to the performance tab and I look on screen, I can see what kind of CPU I have and how many cores. And some of the CPU cores are virtualized. That's called hyper-threading. So in terms of logical processors, I have 2 physical cores in my CPU on my Intel i5 processor. But I also, because hyper-threading is enabled, I have 4 virtual cores or logical processors, right? I have 12 gigs of memory, essentially, right here. That's what shows. Now, for performance purposes, on any server or workstation where performance is a desired criteria of operation, right? It could be a gaming workstation, or it could be a research, it could be a high-powered performance research workstation, or it could be a server. What you want to do is take a note of how much RAM you have before you go to this other page. So when I get into system properties, it normally shows this first. And I'm going to click on advanced and then go into performance. And I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to change this setting, adjust for best performance, and I'll hit apply. And that's after I've done the disk cleanup and defragmentation, right after I finish. And then I'm going to go into here, right? So let's go back. Kind of went fast. I click into the performance setting, and then I click the next advanced tab. So there's 2 advanced tabs in a row. And that throws people, because we talk about the advanced tab and people start looking for it on this advanced, you got to go deeper. Yeah. And there's this concept of virtual memory. Now, virtual memory is page file memory. It's special memory on your hard disk, and it's used to supplement the RAM memory that is loaded onto the motherboard of your personal technology, right? Your tablet or your laptop or your PC. So it's used to extend the memory in a special way so that if we run out of memory, the contents of memory are kind of like slid over in chunks, right? It's that data is transported over here to a special part of the disk memory, hard disk memory, which is much slower. It's much slower, it's temporary, but it's going to give memory breathing room. So this is a part of memory management that has to happen. That virtual memory is normally automatically configured, but what we want to do is change it. And what we want to do is set a minimum and a maximum size so that it's a multiple of your physical memory on your system. Now, if you have a laptop with 8 gigs of RAM and you're short on disk space like I am, I don't have a lot of disk space. Well, that's because I'm doing a lot with virtual machines right now. So I don't have a lot of extra memory to spare. I'm going to simply take the number 12 for my RAM, and I'm going to multiply it in my calculator by 1024. So 12 times 1024 is 12,288. Now that looks familiar because I've then entered that same quantity into initial size and maximum size. And then I click the set button. If you enter the number here and here, and you just click OK, it won't happen. It won't change. It'll be automatically set to some trivial and small amount of disk space. After disk cleanup and defragmentation occur, well, the contents of your hard drive are all organized and slid toward the front of the hard drive, and there's extra space that's wide open and it's empty. And what we want to do is reserve or dedicate or allocate specific amounts of that disk space to be used to swap out the RAM content. We want to use that disk space, an entire chunk, without any fragmentation. Okay. So when you're using a hard disk, when you store files, a lot of times the file size changes or the available space earlier in the disk, it's going to use part of that space to store part of the file, and your system knows, well, I have extra space at the end, and it's going to split the file that's stored in the disk. I'm oversimplifying here, but it's going to split the big file that you're trying to save into smaller chunks, and it's going to put each of those chunks in different places where there's space available on your disk. Now, it does that for a very important reason that we get into in the operating system class. We're not going to do that here. But this creates a condition called fragmentation. A file that you want to store is actually fragmented into different chunks, and it's stored closest to the front of your hard disk. Now, this was something that they did when hard disks were made differently, and they were made with platters, and the platters spin like records or CDs in a drive. And essentially, that fragmentation plays hell. Your page file memory and the performance of your system is terribly compromised when it has to keep reading and writing, reading and writing, reading and writing all the little chunks. So the purpose of doing disk cleanup and disk defrag is to get everything organized and on the beginning of the disk, and then over here on the end of the disk where there's wide open space, you set up this swap file. You designate, isolate, and classify this special area of disk space so it's unused and untouched by anything else. Well, you just got to be careful that you have enough total disk space before you do this. If you're somebody who owns a laptop or a PC and you look and you've got hundreds of gigabytes of space, then instead of just using a single multiple of the memory, you are blessed. What it means instead is that you can do 2 or 3 times the amount of memory that you have, 2 or 3 times the size of your RAM. So you can do this, right? Times 2. Oh, I could change this number here to 24,576. If I had hundreds of gigs of drive space left after I did a cleanup and I did a defrag, if I had 80 gigs of free drive space, you know, I might be willing to consider doing this if I was only going to build one virtual machine. So, and in the extreme, of course, if you have terabytes, you can do 3 times. Now, how does this change for you? I have a laptop with 12 gigs of memory. In your case, you'd have a laptop with 8 or 16. So you multiply by 1024, And what you have is 8192. And if you're cramped for hard disk space, you'd put 8192 here, 8192 there, and then you would click set. If you don't click set and you just click OK, it won't work. But then if you do and you click set and then OK and you're finished, what you're going to notice in my case, right? In my case, 12 gigs of this hard disk space isn't showing because it's already taken up. It's no longer free space. If I were to eliminate that feature I just showed you, almost instantly I'd have 12 more gigs of space right here for free space. But then Windows would automatically decide, okay, where am I storing separate chunks of RAM? That causes a performance hit. Why does it cause a performance hit? This is a really cool part of computer architecture, I think. One of the most. You're going to open up, everybody do this with me. I'd love it if you could follow along, right? Oh, by the way, it's going to ask you to reboot. After you set up the page file memory by using the same number, and you set it and you say, okay, it may prompt you to reboot. Some cases it doesn't. You should reboot anyway. When you come up, you'll have less drive space, but that's normal, right? Because you took up a designated portion. And that's why we have 12 gigs less here because I use a 12 gig partition. Are there any questions before we go to the next part?
I have a question, Dr. Gandalf.
Yes.
So the drive you're partitioning is the one we're going to use for the virtual machine?
Is the what?
The drive we're partitioning is the one we're going to use for the virtual machine in the case that someone has more than one drive?
If someone has more than one drive, then you could use the other drive for the virtual machine. But you're going to want to use that page file setup on the C drive. So you wouldn't,
Okay.
you wouldn't want to set up the page file on a different drive. And the page file setup is different than virtual machine setup. But you can use the other drive to create and build your virtual machine. And that's actually a great reason why you would want more than one drive on your system. So I'm kind of glad you asked that question.
Okay. Thank you.
If you select this computer or my computer, or if you've named your computer, everybody's in File Explorer now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you're going to right click this. And instead of going to properties, you're going to go to manage. That's going to load something called computer management. And you're going to select device manager. Now, I think we've had a class where we showed you this screen before. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have showed you this screen before. Maybe device manager.
I don't think it was in this class, Dr. Gandalf.
Oh, may not have been in this class. Okay. So one of your assignments is to display and capture RAM. The simple truth is that each of you have different kinds of processors. Each of you have different kinds of memory modules, right? Each of you have different displays, graphics adapters, network cards, right? Everybody has a different kind of hard drive, right? And yet, by some magical miracle scenario, you can build and run applications that function regardless of what kind of brand or model you're running it on. And that's because of the operating system. Your operating system takes the hardware components on the physical hardware components, like my webcam, right? And it takes that camera and my hard disk and my keyboards and my mouse and all those differently branded, different models of devices. And it creates a virtual instance. It virtualizes that physical hardware device. Let's take the wireless adapter as an example. My laptop has both a corded Ethernet port where I can hardwire a connection to the internet. I can use a patch cord or an Ethernet cable, and I can plug directly into the router that connects my environment to the internet, right? But I also have a wireless adapter. And if I right click and go to properties here, what I find is that in the advanced tab, in the resources tab, this is where my virtual wireless card lives. Now, what am I saying? I have so much RAM on my laptop. When I power on my laptop, in order for every application every common application I download to run properly on all these different brands, all these different models, all these different types of components, my operating system creates a virtual representation of my network card and my display adapter and my hard disk and my CPU and my keyboard. Is everybody with me so far? We're building like a representation of my hardware components, and I'm reserving a specific memory range in RAM for that virtual representation of the actual physical device. So I have actual physical components, but then my operating system creates a virtual, kind of like okay, it works in a similar manner, but I build it in memory and I load that into RAM. And most people don't realize that all of, your RAM some of your RAM is always used, and they don't understand where, I'm not running any application. Why is a third of my RAM used? Well, if you have a lot of hardware on your system, it's reserving address ranges in your memory to build this virtual device. Now, what does the virtual device do? That virtual wireless device is like a universal translator. It's a common denominator of sorts. The disk drives, the display adapters, the Ethernet cards, the CPUs, all of that, because it's created virtually, it has the same behavior. It has the exact same features and functionality. And because I'm creating a virtual representation of my wireless card that in turn out the back end is actually talking to my real physical card. This is connected through the operating system to my real physical wireless adapter, okay? What we're saying here is that the RAM in your system is used to stage virtual representations of all of the physical hardware components. And when it's done its job, it's created a virtual version in memory that acts and works just like the real thing. And that memory can't be used for anything else. That's the important part. The memory address range designated for this virtual wireless component cannot be used for other things. Okay? Now, what you're going to do is, after you finish working through the optimizing my personal technology activity again, what I want you to do after you're finished, the second activity, the second assignment that you're going to complete for module 4 is that you're going to get to this screen and you're going to find a component and go to the resource tab where the memory range for that virtual component is shown. And you'll capture an image of this. And you'll do it because we want you to understand the connection of why RAM is so precious and why we go to the trouble of setting up page file memory. When you set up page file memory, it's as if you're extending the RAM you have in a very high performance manner, so that after all of this is taken care of, you still have a lot more RAM to work with for your applications. If done properly, you can double the performance of your laptop. It'll seem like it is a brand new laptop if it's done properly. And I'll tell you this, the best time to do this optimization is when you wipe your laptop or your PC clean. It's called a bare metal wipe. You erase everything on the disk. After, of course, you've saved all the things you want to keep. So you wipe your laptop or your PC clean down to the bare metal. You've already saved the data you want to keep. You get a fresh, sterile, pure copy of the install media. You create that. And there's a feature in Windows 10 where you can build a USB and it will build and install media file on the USB. And then you can go back into your system and reload from scratch a new version of the operating system. So it's actually better than factory. You start off with the latest version of Windows, not the one that came from the factory. And if you perform these steps, to optimize your personal technology, what's going to happen is that the performance of your laptop or PC is ramped up and doubled before you even begin loading other software on it, right? That's the best time to do all this. Now, we're fixing the car, so to speak, as it's rolling down the highway. We're doing some things to enhance your performance, but you're not wiping your laptop or your PC down to bare metal. You're not rebuilding your entire system. Although that is a great way to learn about systems and the hardware components and all that kind of stuff. When you rebuild your system, you find out that there are special drivers for some of the components you have to download off the internet. And sometimes you have to do that on a separate system and put it on a thumb drive when you're loading that software. So there's all sorts of extra hoops to go through, but I wanted you to appreciate how important the role of RAM is, and ultimately how important it is to supplement the amount of RAM you have with this virtual memory or page file memory. Doing that gives a lot of extra breathing room for your operating system to build these virtual components. So I'm going to repeat the assignment that you did in the beginning of the semester. I want you to do it again. Then, after you're finished capturing the screenshots, I want you to include the screenshot that shows you have adjusted the virtual memory. So I'm going to add a new criteria. What am I saying? I want you to be able to show that screen where you go into the page file settings under advanced, under performance, under advanced again, and inside here, this is going to be a required criteria for your optimizing personal technology this time. Okay? I need to be able to see that that's there. Once again, click set and then okay. It's very frustrating when students go to all that trouble and they forget to click set. After that's done, I want you to pull up the other screen where you're showing a component that has a resource tab with a memory range. Some of them don't have that. They don't have a resource tab with a memory range, but a lot of the high-powered ones like drives, display adapters, and in particular network cards, they have a designated memory range. I want you to capture this screen to submit for assignment 4.2, because that's going to lead to a round of exploration that we perform on the digital components. Okay? Are there any questions before we close out for the day? Is everyone clear about what's expected for 4.1 and 4.2?
Yes.
Now, once,
Yes.
Once 4.1 and 4.2 are complete, now we're in a good place to install VirtualBox and then create a whole virtual machine. That's a whole nother level of hardware configuration. So we'll get to that early next week. Please remember to reconcile your Module 3 assessment. I'm going to be putting the final version of the Module 3 assessment out there over the weekend. And I'd love it if you could complete your attempt of that soon. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, stop recording.